Okay, we've been working in LabVIEW for the past few weeks, and I wanted to spend a few minutes kind of going over some of the material we've already covered as a review, and hopefully this will answer any questions that you may have concerning some of the things that we've already covered throughout the semester. So this will be fairly brief. As we've already discovered, every time we create a LabVIEW program this semester, we save it as a VI, so it has a file extension .vi. And VI, as we've already seen in class through some of the labs that we've already completed, stands for virtual instruments. So a virtual instrument is something that we program and we configure on the front panel, and it can act exactly like a real life device, such as an oscilloscope or a toggle switch or a multimeter or any other type of real world device that we're already accustomed to, except that these are program devices that just reside in the software. Since we've been working with LabVIEW so far, we're very familiar with the two different programming views that we have for LabVIEW. One is the front panel display. That's where all of the front panel objects such as numeric controls and indicators and waveform charts, toggle switches, and things like that reside. And then there's the block diagram. So the block diagram is where all the code goes. That's where we do all the wiring, all the terminals, and the different functions that we've become accustomed to so far this semester. The front panel, again, like we said, this is where the user will interface with your program, and it can have numeric controls such as this, where a user can supply data. It can be a slider arm like this that would allow us to change data or supply data for our program. And then this is just an example of an indicator, which is just a temperature graph, which we refer to as an output. So these are inputs, allows users to supply information to the program, and then output is something that is used for just a visual indication or a display. We go to the other view. This is the block diagram view. This is where we have all of our terminals, our wiring, our different structures that we're learning throughout the semester. And then also keep in mind that we have different colors, and the colors of the wire and the terminals indicate the type of data it deals with. So orange we're already familiar with. That's a numeric data that will allow you to express a decimal. Blue we really haven't talked a lot about, but blue is another numeric type of data, but it's a whole number, it's an integer. Pink, we just introduced that over this past week or so, and that is string data. So we're accustomed to seeing different colors on terminals and wires based on the different data types that LabVIEW is dealing with. I want to go very briefly to the palettes that we've been working with. We know that we have a controls palette, and we have a tools palette, and we also have a functions palette. So when we're dealing with the front panel, and we're placing these different controls and indicators on the front panel, this will allow us to access the controls palette. So we're already accustomed to the controls palette. Every time we bring it up, we expand the modern tab, and then we have the numeric data, the Boolean, the strings and path that we're dealing with, the graph, if you recall, that's where we found a waveform chart the other day, the decorations, which we're already accustomed to using, and then the ring and enum that allows us to place an enum on the front panel. But here again, once we place it on the front panel, then we can configure it, we can go into the properties, and we can change it so that it's exactly the way we want it to look and to react once our program actually executes. We also have a toolbar on the front panel as well as the block diagram. And just very briefly, we pointed this out in class that if we have text that we want to change the style of the text, we would drop down here, we could change the font, the size, we could make it bold or italics, we could change the color. These are the tools that we've been using to configure the front panel. So if you recall, this one is our alignment options. So if we select this, it will allow us to align objects either horizontally or vertically, either on the edge or the center, depending on what we want to do. And then this one we've used quite a bit, especially when we place decorations on the front panel. This allows us to move objects to the back or forward so that we can set up our front panel exactly the way we want it. Just again as a reminder, on the front panel we have indicators and controls. Controls allows the user to place data into the program, and that could be a push button, a dial, it could be a numeric control where we enter numeric data. It could be a text or a string control where we actually have to type something in. It could be an enum where we choose a selection that we've worked with so far, all of those in the past already this semester. And then indicators, those can be considered an output, and that really is just data that is displayed on the front panel. This is an example of comparing a front panel control and an indicator. If you recall, a front panel control will have a white field, and that allows us to select it, enter data. If we allow the increment decrement buttons to stay visible, then we can enter the data kind of one step at a time. A numeric indicator has a gray background, so that is just numeric data, but it doesn't allow us to select anything. And also remember, I can make these visible or not visible. So if I wanted to make the label not visible or the increment decrement buttons not visible, I would simply right click and deselect those options, and they would not be visible on the front panel. Booleans we've talked about so far. A Boolean is just a data type that has one of two states. It's either yes or no or on or off. And we can have a Boolean control, such as a virtual toggle switch, or a Boolean indicator, such as an LED that just gives us an indication whether something is true or false. String data, we were just beginning to work with those. We have string controls and string indicators. So this allows us to display some type of a message or receive some type of a text input from the keyboard from the user. And it could be a password or a user login or any type of data that we want to work with. And the string indicator just allows us to display a certain text based on different options in our program. Every object that we place on the front panel, we know that we can go into the properties and change it and customize it exactly the way we want it. So typically, let's say for example, we place this meter on the front panel. By default, it'll just give it meter as the label. It will give it a default scale of 0 to 10. This is where I can go in and I can change the visible items. So if I didn't want the label to be displayed, I would deselect label, and the label, which in this case is called meter, would not be visible any longer. If I want to go down into the properties, I would get several tabs that's related to this meter, and then I can customize it any way I want to so that it displays the information the way I want my program to display it. Also keep in mind I can resize this, I can change the color of the needle, I can change the scaling to anything that I want to. It's pretty much unlimited what I can do as far as the properties for this front panel meter in this case. When I go into the properties, so if I went down here and I selected properties, I would get another dialog box. And if you notice, I have all of these tabs, and then I have more. If I selected this arrow, the tabs would move over and I have more choices. So like I said, that's just about unlimited the way I can go in and configure this so that it will respond exactly the way I want to once I complete my program. I do have the ability to select multiple objects and change common parameters all at one time. So if I had a meter indicator 0 to 10, and then I have this control slider 0 to 10, if I mouse click and drag across both of them and right click and select properties, anything that's common to them I can change at the same time, which that's another shortcut. And we've been finding shortcuts throughout the semester related to LabVIEW anyway, so that's another one. The block diagram, as you recall, this is where all the code goes. So we have our terminals, we have our functions, we have our wires. Remember, anything that I place on the front panel as an object will show up as a terminal on the block diagram. And if for some reason I get confused about which is related to which, if I double click any of these terminals, LabVIEW will show me its corresponding front panel object, which is really a time saver, especially as we start to create programs that have a really busy block diagram and front panel. That kind of keeps us squared away. When we're working on the block diagram, we use the functions palette. So this will have all of the different terminals, the different functions, the sub-VIs related to the program that we're going to create. This semester, pretty much anything that we're going to place on the block diagram will be under the programming. So if I expand programming, I have the different objects for numeric, compares, booleans, timing functions, and structures, and things like that as we are learning as we go through the semester. The block diagram also has a toolbar, and here again I have different alignment functions, so I can align my objects on the block diagram as well. Remember, this is the way we're running our programs this semester so far. We have the run, and at this point we're using the run continuous so that it continuously executes, because we haven't gotten into any of the structures such as the while loop, the for loop, but we'll get there over the next couple of weeks. Once again, our terminals are related to different colors. So in this case, these terminals that would show up on the block diagram are orange, so we know that they're dealing with numeric data type that supports a decimal. And you also notice these have arrows pointing out, so that lets me know that this is information that is being supplied on the front panel, and then the data will actually come out of this arrow, if you want to think about it that way, and then I'll wire it into my block diagram as I go. All right, so that was just a quick overview or a review of the major parts of the LabVIEW programming environment.